Now that we understand the need of memory, the different memory classification, and flash and EEPROM memories, we can now move our discussion to the AUTOSAR approach of memory. So to start with memory in AUTOSAR, there are some fundamental terms we need to understand. And one of the most important topic is about the NVRAM block. So what is NVRAM block? Let's look. NVRAM block is the entire structure which is needed to administrate and store a block of NV data. So this NVRAM block is something that is everything that we can think of that is required to manage and store some non-volatile data. Okay, so it can be composed of many things, and the final output is that we'll be able to manage and store non-volatile data effectively in the AUTOSAR environment, say. So the NVRAM will be composing of some objects, as I said now, right? So these can be like memory storage elements by themselves. For example, there can be a block which can be used for storage of NV data, the pure NV data. There can be another block which is used to store the status information, etc. So depending on this, we have a classification. And since we are speaking about storage, we can refer to them as storage objects or buffers. In this diagram, you can see the 4 types of storage objects or buffers that are actually incorporated and together called as NVRAM block. The first one is RAM block, the second is ROM block, third is NV block, and finally we have admin block. Let's discuss each one by one. RAM block is the first block we'll be discussing. It's fairly simple. The first important property you need to understand about RAM block is that it's an optional block. It's not compulsory that we should have this block. Okay. Second one is that this block resides in RAM memory. So the name is easy, right? The RAM block means it resides in RAM memory. So in right side, as you can see, there is the figure of a typical RAM block. So there is the user data part, which can be permanent or temporary data. Then there is the RAM block CRC part, which has the CRC checksum value. So as I said, this RAM block is like a optional block, and it is not important that we have it as a permanent one. We can also have a temporary RAM block. So that's about temporary and permanent. Then is about the CRC part, which is part of the RAM block. Even this is optional. So we can have a RAM block even without the CRC part. Now what is its use? Its use is to hold live data. So RAM block, for example, when the vehicle is executing and when there is some memory that need to be stored lively, so that kind of data can be stored in a RAM block. Just remember that this block is existing in RAM memory, so it's volatile in nature, right? Okay, then let's move to the next one. ROM block. So this is also an optional block. Okay, so like RAM block, this is also optional. It's not compulsory we have this block in our configuration. The second part is that it resides in ROM memory. So again, easy, right? It's ROM block means ROM memory. So right side you can see the structure of a ROM block. Note that it doesn't have the CRC optional part. So there is no CRC part for the ROM block. And it's usually storing information that are persistent in nature. Okay, what do we mean by persistent nature? That means the value that is stored in ROM block will not be modified during a program execution. So whatever that is happening in the vehicle, we don't mind. The value that is stored in ROM block still remains same. ROM block, then thereby is used to store default data. So the default data will be the data that will have some default values, so that in case of some memory corruption, we can actually load the data from the default data and thereby ensure the proper working of the system. Next, we will discuss NV block. Now, this is the first mandatory object we will be discussing about. The previous memory objects, the RAM and ROM block, are optional, but we cannot have a project or a configuration without NV block. And as you can see on the right side, the typical NV block consists of NV block data and the NV block CRC. The NV block is persistent in nature. Okay, so this is persistent nature. So as you can guess, this will be in the NV side. So it will be part of the NV memory, not in the RAM. It will not exist in the RAM because it's persistent nature. Okay, so the value will be always available and even after the power is off. And another striking functionality or the property of NV block is that it can be modified during program execution. So you can imagine something like there is a live part of data that is manipulated in the RAM block. Then there is a live kind of environment which is created by the NV block. But the main striking difference between two of these blocks is that one is having a RAM kind of behavior, that is random access, and the non-volatile volatile part, whereas the NV block will be of non-volatile nature. And it, as you can guess, it resides in flash memory. I just told you it's part of NV memory. The CRC part, which is part of the NV block, is again optional. We can have an NV block without the CRC functionality. And the application of NV block is that it holds the data that are stored periodically or on request. So dynamic values, you could say, live data. Live data will be updated on the NV memory. That's all. That's what you need to understand about NV block. Let's move to the next one. Now we have something called as administrative block. So as the name suggests, it has some important data that is stored in this block. Okay. So just like the previous block we spoke of, this admin block is a mandatory object. So we cannot have a configuration without admin block. It's non-persistent in nature. That means the value that is stored will only be available while the vehicle is running. Okay, once it's switched off, we lose this data. And that moves us to the third point, which is that it resides in RAM memory. So the second and third points are actually interlinked. So we can say if something is non-persistent, we can guess that it's in RAM memory. So as you can see in the right side, the typical memory block is like there is just one part, there is no CRC optional part here, it's just admin block, and it is having something called as admin data, which we'll just discuss now. Admin block stores attribute error status information of NVRAM blocks. So this is what actually means by admin data. It stores some important critical information such as attribute, error, status information, etc. And that's the only role of admin block, just the status information. Apart from this information, there is one more important information that is stored in an admin block, which is the dataset index. Now, the dataset index is something that is used to access a dataset. If you don't know about dataset, it's like an array in C programs. So, if we have an array, to access an array, we have to use an index, right? So, similarly, if there will be an array of memory which will have equal sizes, and if we need to move in this memory, we can actually access this memory using index. So if we get the correct index, we can access that particular part of the dataset. And this index value is stored in admin block. So that's the importance of administrative block. Now we can move to a summary, right? We have just discussed all kinds of blocks that are part of NVRAM. So let's move to a summary. Let's start with the first one, RAM block. See, RAM block was used to transfer data between NVM and our application. It's clear, right? It's something that exists in the running time. So it's basically used to transfer the data between NVM and application. So NVM stands for non-volatile memory. Okay, clear, right? Okay, fine. Next we move to admin block. The admin block contains important status info regarding the blocks. So if we visualize that, RAM block will be always working in tandem with the admin block, and the important status information will be present in the admin block. Third is the NV block, which is used to store persistent data. Yeah, this is where the final data is written to, right? The whatever that is calculated and important persistent data that we need to store is written into the NV block. And finally, there is ROM block, which is gives the default data if needed, right? If we have some corruption, then we can actually load the values from the ROM block. And as we discussed, RAM block, admin block, which of this RAM block and ROM block are not compulsory. It's optional, but admin block and NV block is compulsory. We cannot have a configuration without that.